Hello, everyone. Thanks for being with us today. I'm Chris Goodwin with the Mississippi Department of Archives and History. Welcome to this week's History is Lunch program, which is sponsored by the John and Lucy Shackelford Charitable Fund of the Community Foundation for Mississippi. We're in our home, the Craig H. Nielsen Auditorium in the Museum of Mississippi History and Mississippi Civil Rights Museum, and we are streaming live on both Facebook and YouTube. And remember, you can watch those videos anytime afterward on those two platforms. If you've not already done so, please silence your cell phone. Do you have artifacts that tell a family story or illuminate a piece of Mississippi history? On Saturday, March 11th, MDAH staff will teach you how to conserve those documents, photographs, and other artifacts at our Community Curation Day. The event is free, but you'll need to contact the State Archives to reserve your spot. And then join us this Sunday, March 12th, at 2 p.m. for our next Sunday screening. We'll see Mysterious Circumstance, The Death of Meriwether Lewis, then have a question and answer session with the filmmaker Clark Ritchie, stars Amy Gossett and Marcus Dupree. Finally, I hope you'll come back next Wednesday for a March Madness-themed History is Lunch when Rick Cleveland will be in conversation with Mississippi State University and NBA great Bailey Howell. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Katharine Burnett and Monica Miller, editors of the new LSU Press book, The Tacky South. Friends, rarely have I felt that I had more to contribute to a program than today's. I woke up and I thought, what can I do to be a help to this program other than make strong coffee and make sure there are plenty of sweets? So I went in my closet. I found my red pants, but somebody told me last year that the South is the region where it's still okay for men to wear red pants. And I found my jacket, which has sadly shrunk over the last 15, 20 years, particularly around the middle. And I threw them out on the bed, and while not exactly distinguished, I realized they weren't exactly tacky either. And so I did a little more work, and I found a Western wear shirt with snaps, and I thought maybe mixing that up a little would help, but it still didn't quite get me there. And so I thought, what would make my mama click her tongue at me if I wore? And I thought, I really need a tie that looks like a catfish or a bass hanging from my neck, but I didn't have one of those. So I found my son's old Peter Cottontail tie, which has rabbits and carrots, and even though it hangs halfway down and is goofy, it's still not quite tacky. It still doesn't quite put me over, I don't think. And so I thought, well, what would my grandmother need to call me tacky? And that made me realize that the hat that I wear when I'm working in the yard would be all she required. Katharine Burnett is an associate professor of English at Fisk University. She is the author of Cavaliers and Economists, Global Capitalism and the Development of Southern Literature, 1820 to 1860, and co-editor of the Rutledge Companion to Literature of the U.S. South with Monica Miller and Todd Hagstedt. Burnett earned her B.A. in German and English Literature from the University of Tennessee, her M.A. in English Literature from the University of Mississippi, and her Ph.D. in English Literature from the University of Tennessee at Knoxville. Monica Carroll Miller is an associate professor of English at Middle Georgia College. She is the author of Being Ugly, Southern Women Writers and Social Rebellion, editor of the forthcoming collection of Flannery O'Connor letters, Dear Regina, and co-editor of the aforementioned Rutledge Companion to Literature of the U.S. South. Miller earned her B.A. and M.A. in English Literature from the University of Tennessee at Knoxville and her Ph.D. in English Literature from Louisiana State University. I met her in 2012 when she was the Eudora Welty Fellow. Help me welcome to the stage Katharine Burnett and Monica Miller.
This is all very weird. Like walking in, I feel like I need like a hype man or something, and like, and also
I think
this
we
is
have
really
a good
uncomfortable.
hype man.
Yeah, that was pretty good. Yeah, but I was telling Chris before it started because he walked us through the process too. I was like, I actually think it looks pretty good. You might be doing yourself a disservice. It didn't quite hit the tacky mark, but
The
Yeah.
carrots coordinate with the orange in the
I know.
mattress really nicely.
You might like be too classy in spite of yourself. But yeah, hi everyone. Thank you so much for having us, and thanks so much for showing up. We're super excited to be here. We're very, very excited. But yeah. So I guess like we were thinking about, because this is a co-edited collection, and from inception, this has been something that Monica and I have collaborated on, from jump, where it's really been just kind of like a two-person thing, along with all of the amazing contributors to the collection. We thought we would take a somewhat more conversational approach, thus the two chairs and all of that, and just start off by kind of talking about like the inception of the collection, where it came from, and we'd like to hear as much from y'all as possible too, questions and whatever. So it's going to be a little loosey-goosey, but yeah. So yeah, let's go and get started.
All right. Yeah, so we're going to talk about, first of all, how the book came to be, and then read a bit from our favorites and talk about the concept of tackiness, because we were pleasantly surprised to discover that tackiness really does have Southern roots. And then we'll read a bit from some of our favorite essays in the collection, and then open it up. But we wanted to start by talking about, Katie and I met in 2008 when I was a master's student at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and she was a PhD student. And I was really delighted to find that, when you're even in graduate school, when you're in a seminar class, when the teacher asks a hard question and everybody looks down, Katie and I were two of the people who usually would venture to say something.
We were the dorks.
Yeah, we were the
dorks. Yeah.
And so we very quickly became friends, and through our graduate school and now professional careers, have done things like coordinated conference presentations together, and helped each other with our dissertations and with writing, and now both of us have administrative positions in our schools and are helping each other with that. So Katie and I formed a friendship in graduate school, and then the origins of this book we talk about in the preface. Like so many books about Southern culture, I would imagine, this book has its origins with a friend of ours, Michael Bibler, and I were in a bar in the French Quarter. And Michael Bibler is an amazing scholar, and he teaches at LSU. He has the essay on the B-52s in this book, and he had actually been writing about and researching the band, the B-52s, the Athens, Georgia band, who I'm sure many of you have heard, Love Shack, but they were kind of like the first big band to make it out of the Athens music scene in the late 1970s. And we were in New Orleans for an American Literature Association conference. We were talking about the B-52s and how odd it is that they're always described as that tacky little dance band from Athens, Georgia. And we're like, why is it tacky? I mean, their clothes are odd, right? But why aren't they the campy band from Athens, Georgia? Hey, look. Why is it always the tacky little band? And so Michael and I were sitting at a bar, honestly waiting for our table, in the French Quarter. And so we looked up, we were trying to figure out, well, what's the difference between tacky and campy and playful and silly? And when we got to tacky, we discovered that the Oxford English Dictionary says that tackiness originally meant sticky, like tacky glue. And it wasn't until the late 19th century in South Carolina horse farms that the people who tended the tack horses were referred to as tackies. And so Michael and I got very excited about this concept that tackiness has these Southern roots. And so we had been talking about, there was an upcoming conference, an upcoming Society for the Study of Southern Literature conference that we'd been talking about maybe we should do a panel for. We'd been talking to Katie about that. We knew that Katie loved the B-52s as we did. So we texted Katie going, Katie, guess what? And she, is in Nashville. Guess what? Did you know that tackiness has Southern roots? We need to do a conference panel about this.
Yeah.
Katie was not exactly thrilled to be getting this random text.
So dig, if you will, a picture. These jerks are living it up in New Orleans and like having a grand old time. I am grumpily grading a giant stack. I mean, it's not like a literal stack because everything's digital these days, but I'm grading like a metaphorical stack of first-year writing papers in my office at Fisk University in Nashville, just like, and then I get this text from them in the bar going, hey, did you know tackiness? And I was just like, But it happened to work out because I always joke that I'm like the boring part of our team because Monica gets to write about cool stuff like the B-52s, and I write about the 19th-century South, which is like anything but cool or like enlightening, and it's frankly just like really depressing sometimes. But when they texted me this and they were like, hey, did you know tackiness has these origins in the early part of the 19th century? I was like, well, that's my jam. And I happened to be in my office with all of my books, and I was like, so I just kind of grabbed like a collection by Augustus Baldwin Longstreet, Georgia scenes. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with Longstreet, he was an early 19th century author, wrote what are now called Old Southwest humor tales, which were really, really popular in the early part of the 19th century. Because at the time, like the Old Southwest was like Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia. And so there are these short, really funny stories. And so I grabbed Georgia scenes, which came out in 1835, and I just started flipping through, and lo and behold, one of the stories has the word tacky in it, used in the way that Monica and Michael were describing. And I was like, well, sometimes boringness and like nerdy 19th centuryness pays off. And so I was like, there's something here. And so what really from that kind of origin point, this was kind of like going, wait, where does tackiness come from? Me being crabby and like looking through stuff in my office emerged into this really interesting collection where we really examine not just the origins of tackiness and how we can trace it through these regional designations, but how those different designations take on a life of their own into all of these different representations of things that we normally think of as tackiness today as more of an adjectival form. So think like something that's over the top, something that's kind of trashy. And that's really what the collection is about, is kind of thinking about tackiness as an aesthetic mode. Like how is it something that we've taken on and that we put and project onto other people? And how did it get from this kind of noun form of stickiness to the person who's handling stuff to whatever that is on the screen? And thinking about like how tackiness, and why is it so intricately entwined with the South? Like why do we keep kind of coming back to that? And so that's really like where the whole thing came from. And one of the things that we were thinking about in putting this collection together is because tackiness has so many different multivalent definitions, we wanted the collection itself to be like that. So if you're flipping through, all of the essays just touch on so many different things, from Michael Bibler's essay on B-52s to Jill Anderson's, that was the picture a second ago, essay on the Golden Girls and Murder, She Wrote. So we wanted to touch on these kind of like pop culture things, but we also wanted to have essays that really trace these historical origins of it, that have that kind of like hard-hitting literary criticism. So it's a blend of all of these different things. But one of the things that kept coming up, almost like in spite of ourselves, as you can tell by our cover, is Dolly. She just kept rearing her head throughout the whole structure of this. And that's one of the questions that we get quite a bit, is like, why? Like, why does Dolly keep coming up? Why is this why is she such a structuring force in our collection or in the cultural moment to begin with? And how does she end up being a conduit for talking about tackiness in all of these different ways that we've been discussing?
And especially as we were putting this together. So we started in 2015 was the first time we had this conversation. And Katie and Michael and I did a conference presentation at the 2016 Society for the Study of Southern Literature, and then Katie and I put together panel presentations, doing calls for proposals from other people. We did one at the Modern Language Association, and we did one at the American Studies Association, Southern American Studies Association. By the time we were actually working on the book, we were, had the book contract and we had the contributors working. The fall of 2020 is when we were really putting the book together and trying to, write an introduction and put it together. And if y'all will think back, the fall of 2020, Dolly Parton was in the news like every other day. She donated money to fund COVID vaccines. She had, provided money for the Sevierville fires. I mean, it was kind of annoying because we're like, could you take a day off so we could finish our introduction?
Yeah, literally, it was like Monica would text me because she did something else, and I'm like, ah, and it just kept like snowballing, just more and more stuff, and has even more so in the past couple of years. I feel like we can, that I know. I tell Monica all the time because I live in East Nashville. You cannot walk like 5 feet without running into a Dolly mural on some random building where you're like, why does the taco shop have a Dolly mural? That's weird. So that kind of force is just like accelerated.
But one thing that I find fascinating about Dolly Parton is that she kind of exemplifies what we have started thinking about of tackiness as a kind of strategy, as a kind of savvy political strategy. It's something that we didn't talk about enough in this book, I think, is the politics of tackiness, because Dolly Parton uses her tackiness as like a great smokescreen of like, make fun of my hair, make fun of my breasts, make fun of my makeup all you want to, while I'm back here like amassing an empire, distributing millions of books to children around the world, and uses tackiness as kind of a diversionary, distracting tactic to keep us from noticing what she's actually doing. And this is something that we've just started talking about more, as how maybe that's part of the Southern strategy. I've been calling it the new Southern strategy, as tackiness, to actually think about how it's functioning in popular culture. Do you want me to go ahead and read from Susanna?
Should I talk like a little bit about the structure of the
Sure.
book too? Yeah. And so to build on what Monica was just saying, as we were sort of using Dolly as this kind of like figurehead or whatever you want to call her, and like thinking about all these questions of like, what is tackiness? How does it get defined? We saw the book kind of emerging in sort of 3 distinct parts. And so when you flip through, the essays are grouped as such. So the first one is grouping essays that are talking about tackiness, I think in the way that most of us would normally think about it. As a pejorative. So kind of like what Chris was saying, the clucking at the shell hat that you shouldn't wear outside of like cutting your yard, that we're like, oh, that's so tacky, kind of like hissing it under your breath. And so a lot of the essays in that first part are kind of thinking about it in that way. But building off of what just Monica was just saying, we also started to see like how are folks using that label of tackiness in a way that is not just a badge of honor, but as kind of like it's being weaponized. So using tackiness in a way that can be formative and structural. And so
Or
a lot
celebratory.
Or celebratory, yeah. So in the case of Michael Bibler's essay on the B-52s, he talks about how tackiness enables a sense of seamlessness, where we see the seams of things. So we always joke, we see the bra straps showing, and there's nothing wrong in that, and that there's like a power.
And doing it on purpose.
Yeah, and doing it on purpose. I say this, I'm keeping my cardigan on because you will see my bra straps. But so like how there is a sort of power in like taking on that label. And then the final section is thinking about Dolly, because we originally didn't have the collection structured this way, but we had so many essays that kept coming back to Dolly as this touchstone. We were like, let's put them all together. And so one of our favorite essays is the very first one in that final section. We're thinking about Dolly, what we call as middle ground, where she encompasses both of those impulses, tackiness as a pejorative, but also tackiness as a form of celebration, as something that is formative and joyful and good in some ways and powerful.
Well, and when we started putting this collection together, when we first started, putting out calls for proposals of saying, we'd like essays on the South and tackiness, we had to be very careful, because a lot of the proposals we got kind of boiled down to, well, in that honey boo boo a hoot, and just going, can you believe? And we really wanted this to be, we had kind of 2 really main priorities and values in putting this book together. The first is that it be more than just in that honey boo boo a hoot, but actually be analytical and be scholarly and really try to delve into what is this doing. But on the other hand, we also really wanted this to be a readable, engaging, enjoyable book, and not just a bunch of dry academic prose that people would go, well, this is a really boring book on tackiness. And so to me, so we really strove to both, choose writers who wrote in an engaging style and work with them to make this an engaging book. And I think that the chapter by Susanna Young called In Country Music, Women Reclaim, Reframe, and Weaponize Tacky kind of, to me, epitomizes what we were looking for in writing. And so I'm going to start by reading just from the first paragraph of her article. If anybody has the book, it's page 265 in your hymnals. Like getting a handful of seashells to stay put while hot gluing them to a box that will sit atop the toilet in a beach-themed guest bathroom, tacky can be hard to pin down. It's easy enough to dash off a broad definition, media and objet d'art that appeal to, and in many instances are designed specifically to appeal to, unrefined tastes, thus defying rules of decorum. But such a definition invites two important questions. Who decides what constitutes good taste, and why? What does how we define good taste say about us? It's no coincidence that much of what we consider to be aesthetically refined is financially beyond the reach of many, and that much of what we consider tacky has been classified as such not only because it is financially accessible, but because it has been created for or by people society neither values nor respects. We roll our eyes at the Technicolor jungle sprawling across the cover of a Lisa Frank notebook, just as we roll our eyes at preteen and adolescent girls. We ridicule velvet paintings of Elvis, just like we ridicule working-class rednecks and hillbillies. We roast shirts bearing script font inscribed late capitalist adages like, "This mom runs on true crime, wine, and Amazon Prime," and erode or erase systemic social support for overworked mothers. So that's an example of both really, I think, engaging to read, but very sharp, in-depth analysis of just, the ways that tackiness can function.
And one of the other essays that we thought was a really great example of this, and you'll see it cycle through in a second, because how could we not put a picture of a red velvet armadillo cake on a giant PowerPoint in the Mississippi Archives and Museum? But one of our other favorite essays is one by Marshall Armentor about the origins of red velvet cake, where he talks about not just like how it has sort of a fraught history about like, does it come from the South, does it not? It might be a New York thing, it might not. But he also traces it through histories of like things, for example, like the cakewalk, and how it kind of comes from these sort of like origins in like African American literature and African American culture in the 19th century, and how there is this kind of like recycling and this reappropriation of red velvet cake, and how that ends up representing these like kind of larger cycles of reappropriation, and how it seems so silly, but red velvet cake becomes this kind of like touch point or this flashpoint for all these discussions of race and class and things like that. So I thought I would read a little section of his just to give y'all a taste, pun intended, of like his discussion of red velvet cake, and why we think this is a pretty cool essay. So again, this is Marshall Armentor on red velvet cake. You'll see it here in a sec. A clue to the cultural status of red velvet cake can be found in the well-traveled quip of food writer Angie Mosier. It's the Dolly Parton of cakes, a little bit tacky, but you love her. The question of red velvet cake's universal appeal and unquestioned ubiquity notwithstanding, it's a cake that presents so many riddles with the answers hopelessly wrapped up in the endless layers of lore, haughty turf wars, and Southern pride, three things that seem to accompany every Southern regional dish. Among the outstanding conundrums are the problem of its origin. Where does it come from? The problem of the recipe itself. What is it supposed to taste like? And the problem of the right frosting. Does it have cream cheese frosting, whipped cream frosting, or buttercream frosting? I'm a buttercream gal myself. And there are the sometimes divisive feelings that the cake itself engenders. Some love it, some hate it, and some don't know what they are eating when they are eating it. The modern ambiguity and ubiquity of red velvet cake, morphing into cookies, ice cream, and scented candles, revels in the very chameleonic and familiar essence that red velvet cake embodies. But the iconographic presence of red velvet cake and its tenacity in American culture are the only true constants, whether acknowledged by knowing asides like, they used to put beets to get the red color in those things, or, this recipe comes from the Waldorf Astoria. The mythology of red velvet cake bespeaks a legacy of utter inauthenticity and ingenious invention, always performative in the extreme, never mistaken for high culture, and forever a centerpiece of Southern hospitality. And then he goes on and talks about red velvet cake for a while. So again, really great blend. It's stuff we would like to talk about. These are conversations that a lot of us have all the time. It's like, where does that actually come from? But what Marshall ends up doing in this essay, and I think Susanna does really well, like using Dolly, is to kind of use that and think about like how are these conversations revealing something much larger going on in terms of history, in terms of Southern identity, whatever you want to call it. Yeah.
Should I read this next? Is that what's next on the?
Yeah. Do you want?
Sure. So And then Katie and I, in addition to putting this together, writing the introduction, we also each have essays that we wrote ourselves. And my essay is titled, "Southern Women Don't Wear Sweatpants, Southern Mothers and the Deceptive Policing of Appearance." And so there's the red velvet cake, the armadillo red velvet cake from Steel Magnolias that some of y'all may be familiar with. Cycling through in a bit, you may have seen the cocktail napkin that says "Don't be tacky" on it, which you can actually buy online. If you start looking online for things about southernness and tackiness, there's lots of like funny quizzes from Southern Living and things like that. And I noticed that they always talk about mama, or mothers are the ones who are associated with policing tackiness. There's hardly anything about fathers or even about masculinity and tackiness. We think that that's starting to change a little bit with like the concept of bro country and broness. But in general, when you read about southernness and tackiness, it's always mothers who are invoked. So I'm going to read the first couple of paragraphs from my chapter, which, if you're following along, is page 134. Actress Reese Witherspoon has frequently noted in interviews that proper Southern women are acutely aware of their appearance in public. She cites her own rule of never appearing in public in sweatpants as an example of the myriad rules to which a particular model of Southern womanhood is expected to adhere. In a 2016 interview with Women's Wear Daily about her own fashion company Draper James, for example, Witherspoon discussed how her no sweatpants rule is one that her own grandmother impressed upon her. Along with Witherspoon's maternal warnings, in articles such as "Things Mama Says Are Tacky" and 10 Things Every Southern Woman's Asked Her Mama, a popular Southern-themed media outlets such as Southern Living, Garden and Gun, and The Bitter Southerner all use the thread of tackiness as a boundary of appropriate behavior and appearance. Specifically, these boundaries are used to delineate a particularly conservative and even retrogressive aesthetic and identity of Southern white womanhood under the guise of well-meaning and even fun advice and directives. So this essay focuses on the rhetoric of tackiness as it is deployed by media outlets such as those listed above, as well as other recent popular written texts such as Witherspoon's own 2018 lifestyle guide, "Whiskey in a Teacup: What Growing Up in the South Taught Me About Life, Love, and Baking Biscuits." Specifically, I focus on the way that the image of motherhood is used in this aesthetic and behavior-enforcing rhetoric as being frequently referenced in these guides as the teacher, arbiter, and final authority on what constitutes tackiness. As charges of tackiness can imply excess or laziness in a general failure of discipline, letting your bra strap show, for example, or not touching up your roots appropriately, or going out in public in sweatpants.
I like that she keeps gesturing toward me every
yeah.
time she says one of these things.
Well, because you noted the bra strap issue.
It's just,
But so these charges of tackiness are often about excess or laziness, or a general failure of discipline. I particularly focus on the significant role that gender plays in these remonstrations and the ramifications of tackiness as both the delineation of acceptable behavior as well as a pressure valve for occasional relief from the unattainable expectations of successful white womanhood, expectations which I will ultimately argue are built upon a foundation of deceit. And so much of, for example, I pick on Reese Witherspoon a lot, but I think she can take it. A lot of her book, Whiskey in a Teacup, is about how there's this ideal of Southern white womanhood that is very much appearance-oriented, and she talks about how it's impossible to maintain or to achieve, but here are all the tricks for how you hide the children's toys, how you drink whiskey out of a teacup, and do all of these things to make it appear that you are attaining this unattainable ideal. And I also talk about how, and I mentioned it here, tackiness is used both as a way of marking out the boundaries of approved and unapproved. But if you know the boundaries, then you're able to play with them in a societally appropriate way. So for example, the example I use is wearing a red sequined hat to a PTA meeting would be frowned on as tacky because you don't understand the actual norms of what PTA apparel would be. But wearing a sequined red hat to your Red Hat Society luncheon is a fun, kind of carnival-esque hoot pressure valve of thing to do. And doing, again, like using tackiness as a way for fun in a way that's approved is kind of also marks the boundary of I know the rules and I know when it's appropriate to break the rules versus you obviously don't know what the rules are, as a way of marking off who is appropriate and who is inappropriate.
And sorry, that would be super tacky to clear my throat. Okay, so and then I guess like the final essay that we're going to highlight is actually mine, and it dovetails pretty nicely with what Monica was just talking about, because one of the things that I was really interested in exploring in my essay, being the kind of like boring 19th century dork who like does this kind of research, I wanted to explore like not only how did we get from here to there, how do we get from the stickiness, the like original definitions of tackiness, but also that historical definition that is so tied with the South of the noun form of like the tacky who handles horses, to what we normally think of today. And I wanted to explore that in the sort of literary traditions. How is it manifesting? Beginning with that Augustus Baldwin Longstreet story that I mentioned earlier, where I found the mention of the word tacky. And I imagine a lot of y'all know this, but also Longstreet has Mississippi connections. He was the president of the University of Mississippi at one point, and he's still buried in Oxford. I always do like a little thing where I go by there. Anyway, so like, yeah, like fun facts. But so what I did in my essay is I took that story that I found, just randomly pulling off the book off the shelf, and connected it to a Black author from the late part of the 19th century, Paul Laurence Dunbar, who appears also in the cycle that's come through here. Where Dunbar, if you're unfamiliar with him, is a really, really interesting figure, and frankly, like one of my favorite writers. I teach him all the time. Every year, we always read Sport of the Gods in my American Lit class when I teach it. But one of the things that I was really curious about is that Dunbar, he played a lot with dialect, played a lot with taking on different personas and like taking off different personas, both in his writing and in his actual life. So in the picture that cycles through, that's from a photo from the archives in Dayton, Ohio, where Dunbar had spent some time out in Denver because he had tuberculosis and got super into cowboy culture. He was not a cowboy. He was from Dayton, Ohio. Like he had no like connection to it, but he has had all this kind of cowboy paraphernalia. And after that, he ended up writing short stories that were kind of featured in this like Western dialect. And I'm like, what is going on here? And so one of the things that I was looking at in my essay was exploring this, like how can tackiness kind of have that, allow us this ability to take on identities and take them off. And in doing so, allow us a moment of what I call sincerity, where there is this kind of, where we don't have to just label tackiness, but that tackiness can be something that is productive, that is like formative. And so I'll just
genuinely like Dolly Parton.
And yeah, you can genuinely like stuff, or you can like, I like my sweatpants, and yeah, it's okay.
And the B-52's music is wonderful.
Yeah. And so I guess I'll just read like a very short section from my essay. Excuse me. So despite the quality of tackiness and its function as a sorting mechanism in American culture, that kind of pejorative that we usually think of, or what Monica was saying, like that's okay, but that's not okay. Tackiness also enables a greater moments of sincerity that transcend the categories it supposedly creates and delimits. Because in order for something to be labeled as tacky, it must first be familiar or recognized by the observer. You have to be able to recognize that it's off and recognize the thing itself in order to label it as off. And so through this exchange, the moment of recognition, the tackiness of the subject becomes something real and sincere. In these moments of sincerity, there's a form of authenticity in which the ability to perform and interpret tackiness brings forth the knowledge on the part of observers like us that maybe we're not a part of this and that we'll never completely understand it. And in these moments, tackiness reverses the implicit power dynamic, and the ability to read and perform tackiness becomes a way to elevate the tacky person or thing above the normative observer. And so it's that kind of tongue-in-cheek. Yeah, there's Dunbar. Also, he just looks so cool. I love that picture. But what I guess like I'm trying to get at is that like in order for us to kind of see something as tacky, we have to sort of recognize what's off about it and what's sort of valuable about it in the first place, and also sort of see something of ourselves in it. And that kind of moment of sincerity means like, yeah, we're going to embrace this identity and maybe play with it. So Dolly Parton doing all of the things while like low-key just funding, you know, COVID vaccine research in the background, or saying like, yeah, you can dismiss me and my big hair, but I got a lot of money and I'm going to donate it for this amazing kids book program that's been running for years and years. And so that kind of, that hinge, that moment of sincerity was something that I really wanted to explore through these literary representations of tacky. Yeah.
I thought I'm gonna end by reading a bit of Bibler's
Yeah, do it.
piece, because I think, so Michael Bibler, where the whole book project started, he contributed this article about the band, the B-52s, and you've seen the pictures of Cindy and Kate in their giant wigs up there. And he talks about, so this is from his essay, it's on page 220. He says that the B-52s constantly balked at reviewers and critics who claimed the band was being ironic. Late 70s, I've heard people talk about late 70s going to the cool clubs in New York City where the B-52s started playing at. Everybody else there was dressed in black, and then they all showed up looking like they did. And some people assume they must be being ironic at what they were doing. But Michael says in a 1979 interview, Fred Schneider of the band protests, "We're not trying to be camp or trashy. I'm not interested in wallowing in that stuff." In 1981, Pearson added, "People are always hitting us with this American trash aesthetic label, and we won't take it. I mean, we don't use that term, and the supposed trash that we're interested in is good trash." At one point or another, all the band members have stressed that the cultural elements they use and adopt are things they actually like and appreciate. Quote, that the objects themselves are to be enjoyed for their own inherent worth and value. And the band has further challenged claims about their use of irony when speaking about their famous interest in thrift stores. In 1981, Schneider complained, "We said it a million times, but we have always dressed this way. We don't try to capitalize on our clothes any more than on some sort of 60s thing." And Bibler actually interviewed Fred Schneider via email, and he says he repeated this point in his email interview. "We bought thrift store clothes because we didn't have any money. It had no bearing on our music. Sci-fi, Dada, and surrealism and all kinds of humor influenced me, and I still like going to thrift stores and yard sales." And he goes on to say, "In the capitalist system of the music industry, such denials of irony make sense. A thrift store rock that is intentionally ironic can be sold to fans as countercultural, a trendy alternative to trendiness that's so tacky that it's cool, but only for so long until the band starts to sound redundant. If the band is not being ironic as they claim, they can still be marketed as a tacky band as long as fans still see their own enjoyment of the band is ironic. Otherwise, the band's tackiness will appear too far removed from current trends and consign the B-52s to the same thrift store record bins that they mined for inspiration." And to me, they're talking about like, no, we bought these clothes from thrift stores because that's what we could afford and because we liked them. Echoes to me, Dolly Parton's talking about that she mirrored her look, modeled her look on the town prostitute, that she's like, I genuinely like the way that my makeup and my hair looks. One of the challenges of editing a collection is when people end up saying the same thing in every single essay, and I think the sentence that appeared in 75% of the essays submitted was the Dolly Parton quote that it takes a lot of money to look this cheap.
Like every single.
And I forget whose it actually ended up being in, but I think it's an important point to make that fundamentally it's important to remember that all of this is just fun. And that sincerity can be an important part of tackiness that I think can often be overlooked in mining it for its, political purposes, which I do think is really important, or other, the historical relevance of it. But I do think that it's important maybe to end on this idea that there is a lot of sincerity and authenticity and pleasure to be found in tackiness.
Yeah. So I think with that, we'd love to hear from y'all. And
Questions, comments, thoughts?
Yeah.
Places we should go before we leave Jackson?
Angry remonstrations? Like, I don't know.
I think so. Chris has a microphone. Yes.
Very enjoyable. I'm wondering about the Dolly as a trickster and maybe a liminal character as well, and that there's an embodiment of oppositions and things like this within her, and that she's able to do things that most people can't in that vein, that Jungian trickster vein.
Yeah. Well, I will say I think that's definitely there, and I think that kind of goes with that idea of sincerity a little bit, of like being able to use tackiness to your advantage. And it comes, again, to be the 19th century dork, it comes from those original stories. So the story where I first found the use of the word tacky in that Longstreet collection was called The Horse Swap. And it's basically between these two con men who are trying to sell shoddy horses to each other, and then at the end it ends up being kind of a wash because they've ended up conning each other. But the process by which they've done so is they are doing exactly what you're describing Dolly Parton doing, kind of coming up and doing like a little kind of flim-flammery, and then just being like, ha-ha, but then at the end they're both like ha-haing each other. But the like kind of extra layer that ends up happening to the story is that the story itself is told from the perspective of this white middle-class observer who's just kind of standing off, and he's just sitting there kind of like, oh, ha-ha, look at these idiots. And then he realizes at the end that he's kind of been conned from like not only like where he was also drawn into the thing, but then he ends up getting conned by one of the guys at the end of the story. And so I think that's always there, that there's always that kind of tension in the discussion of tackiness and like the use of the word tackiness, not just from like the kind of OED definition, but in the way we use it, that it's always both and. Like we're both kind of like, yeah, it is a little trashy, but also like, yeah, like wink, wink, we got something over you. So yeah, so I think yes.
And also, I love your point of Dolly as a trickster, because, you know, one of my favorite trickster characters in popular culture is Bugs Bunny. And there's so many Bugs Bunny cartoons where Bugs dresses up in drag in a kind of, like, I mean, I think Bugs's reference point was a Mae West character, but certainly there's a really, and we have a wonderful chapter in here on drag. And certainly tricksterism is certainly a big important part of drag, and Dolly is certainly in that tradition too.
Yeah. Yeah, the author for that one is Duarte Gray. She does like a really cool thing where she connects Dolly Parton to Trixie Mattel and other kind of drag performers, but not just drag, but just kind of thinking about that kind of over to the top quality and the wink, wink, nudge, nudge element to all of it. Yeah.
I love Dolly, but the queen of tacky, I'm going to date myself here. Everybody can join in with me.
I feel like I know.
Howdy! I'm just so proud to be here.
I would do it, but I've already like had some faux pas with this microphone, and I didn't want to deafen everybody.
Well, my first book is on ugly women, and I've written about Minnie Pearl because that's a fascinating character, and the way that what Minnie Pearl does with gender and class and money.
Yeah.
No, I wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah, Monica and I have been making a list of stuff that we wish we had included, and like Minnie Pearl is definitely one of them. Kind of leaning a little harder into discussions of like class and gender and performance, because it's there in all of this stuff, but in the collection. But we would like to tease it out more. Obviously, we keep getting called out. I don't know why we don't have more Elvis. I'm not gonna lie. Like, and that's like one thing if we had to do another version.
Well,
of it.
and I've been wondering if it's a generational thing, because
Yeah.
I am a different generation from Katie,
Yeah,
and
Gen X,
was
old
all
millennial.
about Elvis, right? I mean, Pulp Fiction, Elvis was very much the Gen X touchstone, and somehow I think that the millennials brought Dolly in.
Yeah, the mantle has been passed. Yeah.
And so we've been talking recently, like, is it a generational changeover from Elvis to Dolly? Because I just put up pictures from Graceland in my office, and, you know, none of my students have been talking about it. Although with the new movie, maybe Elvis will be making a comeback, another comeback,
Yeah.
40, 60 years later.
Yeah.
I have not read these essays, but you may have seen me dart over to look in your index. And I do see that there's a considerable amount from your indexing about the interaction of race, racism, white supremacy in this thing. I don't know if you've been to the Civil Rights Museum, but the second gallery deals with Reconstruction, and a full third of it deals with the terroristic use of lynching and other forms of terrorism for the overthrow of Reconstruction and the resuppression of the formerly enslaved population. And it's set up with trees and lynching trees and has, 800 names of people whom we know were lynched. But the other piece of decoration in that gallery is on the ceiling are reproductions of the racist, stereotyped advertising used to reinforce and reassert white supremacy, both as terror against the people who were portrayed and to reinvigorate white supremacy as part of the reason for the lost cause. Now, those images, and they have mammy dolls and things, are what I certainly would say, this is tackiness embodied, and yet it is being used not to amuse or to self-actualize or even to be a trickster. It is being used for oppressive political purposes, and I don't know if any of your essayists address that, and maybe volume 2 might want to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and also, what is that bridal image next to Angela Lansbury from?
Oh, so that's interesting. So that is from the essay by Jill Anderson, who's a professor at Tennessee State. And she did a whole essay on the Golden Girls and Murder, She Wrote, and how the South kind of gets recirculated through these mainstream televised productions in these warped ways. Like I always call it kind of like a bizarre game of telephone, and how the South ends up getting represented, because like the farther removed it gets, the more the funkier it gets in terms of the representation. So that one in particular, it was actually a made-for-TV movie that came out, I believe, in like the early aughts, like 2002, 2004, or
Yeah,
something like
so
that.
like since 2000. It
Yeah.
isn't like some weird
It's
1985
upsettingly recent.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was a made-for-TV movie for Murder, She Wrote, starring Felicia Rashad, and Taraji P. Henson's in it too. It's weird. And in it, Angela Lansbury's character, Jessica, goes back in time to the antebellum South, and the handling of it is, and Jill does a really, really excellent job in the essay, kind of talking about kind of like the recirculation of like white supremacy, the funkiness of trying to represent like plantation culture into this mainstream audience in the early aughts, where it's interesting, and she dovetails that with a discussion of some of the Golden Girls episodes too. Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about your work right now on the relationship between like cookbook culture and pro-slavery
Oh,
writing?
gosh. Yeah. Well, and also really quick response to your first thing. So in terms of one, I think like the essay collection, it from jump is talking about race, because the origins of the word tacky kind of come from like a racial.
In the OED definition, it actually specifies a white.
A white, yeah. And so there is immediately, there's always a discussion of race. But in terms of specific essays that engage with this, Marshall Armentour's thing on Red Velvet Cake touches on it, because he looks at representations in minstrel tradition, specifically the cakewalk tradition. And in it, he looks at Charles Chestnut's novel, The Marrow of Tradition, if anybody's familiar with his excellent novel. I think 1898 is when it came out, and it's about the Wilmington, North Carolina massacre that happened just a couple of years before the black population there, and there's a cakewalk that features in it. And then also Joe Carson takes the original definition of tackiness and stickiness and talks about tarring and feathering. And he connects it to Frederick Douglass's, I believe, his first autobiography, and then also looks at Reconstruction era politics and how. So those are the kind of specific ones, but I'd say it like runs throughout.
But yeah, the kinds of images that you're talking about is definitely something that, again, in our list of all the things that we would like in Volume 2, that kind of imagery is something that we want there. The other thing that we would like that we've been asked about quite a bit, and we just didn't have people interested in writing about it, but I think that we are looking to actively recruit people to write about how tackiness has been used in religion, in religion in the South.
Yeah.
Is another. I mean, think about like there's Dolly Parton, but then there's Tammy Faye Baker, and the fact that we don't have anything on Tammy Faye just kind of makes me sad. But again, like there was only so many essays that we could include. So that's definitely like on our list for Tacky South too.
Yeah.
That kind of imagery, and then religion is the other thing that we want to include.
And I'll say one thing, because at the risk of becoming what my students make, I end up becoming like a weird Paul Laurence Dunbar fangirl sometimes. But like in response to your question, Dunbar, oh, convenient, actually ended up, during his lifetime, he actually wrote a few of those stage productions of minstrel shows. And this was something that a lot of Black authors at the turn of the century did, because it was like a way to earn money. It was a way to kind of access like mainstream, production. And if you just go and Google Paul Laurence Dunbar like stage shows, you'll see a lot of the playbills are they are those kind of complicated representations. And he felt some type of way about it. Like he wrote a lot about how he sort of hated it, but also was like, this and can be something that can be productive. And I think in a lot of ways it represents exactly what we've been talking about with tackiness, that tension, that it can be something that is hurtful, that is pejorative, that is something that is a label, but how can it be manipulated? How can it be kind of twisted? And I think he's actually a pretty good example of that. So anyway, I just want to throw that out there.
Yeah.
We have a question and a comment from the live stream. Marshall Armentor is watching. He says,
Hey, Marshall, what's up?
following on sincerity, song lyrics could hardly be more plain-spoken and concrete than all the songs on Dolly's My Tennessee Mountain Home. And then we have a question, does the book include visuals? If so, were they selected or included by the authors?
Yes, it does. The two Dolly images that have been up there, the one that's the drawing, and then the other is actually a painting that one of our authors
Anna Creedick owns. Yeah.
She found it.
Yeah, she found it at a thrift store, and she was like, gold mine. So those two came from Anna's, the red velvet cake, I'm trying not to like use bad words, but the armadillo butt is in there. We have a number of images.
And they were chosen by the authors.
Yeah, pretty much all chosen by the authors.
And building on Marshall's point about, yes, that is my favorite Dolly Parton song, actually. But there's quite a bit about music, not just the B-52s, but there's a great piece by Travis Roundtree about Robert Earl Keen. And the problem about publishing a book about songs is that you have to be very careful about how much you're allowed to quote song lyrics in a book. But certainly for me, when we've talked about this, one of the things we did is there's a wonderful website called Large Hearted Boy that invites authors to make playlists of songs that relate to their book. So if you go to largeheartedboy.com, I think, you can find our playlist that goes along with the book. That coming up with a playlist that goes along with the Tacky South is a lot of fun because it allowed me to find things like Rednecks, White Sox, and Blue Ribbon Beer, which to me kind of exemplifies a lot of what we're talking about in this book, and Dolly Parton, but also, who else did we have that was not country music?
Oh, gosh. Of course, it's all. Well, we did put Elvis. Elvis got into our playlist.
Yes.
It's not into the book, and so we have American Trilogy on there because I'm like, you got to do something with that, like Elvis. And I'll also give a plug. You can find it on Spotify. So if you type in the Tacky South on Spotify, it's a playlist on there too. So there's a bunch of good stuff. I think like. Was it Black Velvet was my favorite of your editions. I thought that one was really funny. But.
Unlike Dolly Parton and Moms Mabley, if you're familiar with Moms Mabley.
Yes, another on the list of TV.
Yes. Minnie Pearl dropped character.
Yeah.
Dolly is always in costume.
Yes.
You live in Nashville.
Yes.
Have you ever seen Dolly not in costume?
No, because I mean, it's her.
Yeah. I mean, I talked to Tressie McMillan Cotton, wrote a really great essay about Dolly Parton. And I talked to her about it, and we were talking about how, like, Dolly and Beyonce are really the only two people who you hear nothing bad about. I mean, anytime I've talked to anybody in Nashville, they're like, we all love Dolly. My husband's family is from Sevierville, where there's the statue of Dolly Parton. And people in Sevierville love Dolly Parton. And it's because I'm curmudgeonly, I start thinking, well, there must be something to, she must like do terrible things, something. Nobody can exist. Yeah, nobody can exist that nobody says anything bad about her. But you know, and I'm curious, I would love to know what Dolly Parton is like in a board meeting, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, yes. Yes. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah, I agree.
completely.
And I think it kind of goes back to, I really like your question because I think you're right. It's something that we've thought about a lot. It's like, does it make a difference if it's something you take on and you can just kind of drop, like drag maybe, for example, or is if it's a part of your identity? And I think with her, it's a savvy business move, but like it is also just who she is. And so what is that difference? And honestly, I don't have a good question.
But it
or a
also
good
may
answer
let
for
her
that
actually go to
question.
the grocery store and nobody would actually know what she looks like.
Yeah. You think
Yeah.
so?
Yeah, I'm sure-
Maybe
I'm
she actually goes to that taco shop, and that's why they, and I just don't realize it. Or goes to that lighting store. There's a Dolly Parton like mural on a light store on the Gallatin Road in East Nashville, and I'm like, why? Like, what is it? Anyway, but maybe she buys lamps there. I don't know. That's right, because she didn't do her own shopping.
But no, if there is a thing that she wants to be able to do, you know, there's the problem with fame, right? That you're no longer able to go to the record store or something fun. And I do think that her appearance may allow her to go and sneak around. And if I saw her at the grocery store without her makeup and wig, who knows? I'm sure one of us has seen her.
Yeah. Oh, now I'm taking it as a challenge. Just like Dolly spotting.
Just another comment. Super Tacky continues in Jackson in 2 weeks. The Sweet Potato Queens will be
Yes.
on display.
There was actually another question from the online, the live stream was from Elizabeth Bronwyn Boyd asking for a comment on the Sweet Potato Queens.
Yeah. Oh, if any of y'all have not read her book on Southern Beauty, it is a masterpiece. She has done, her research just blows me away on the research she did on Southern beauty pageants, and sorority life is just astounding. But yeah, I mean, it still persists. I mean, one of the oddest things that I did in high school was once going, because I grew up in Georgia, was going to the Mule Days Festival and watching the crowning of the Mule Queen. It's just an aspect of Southern culture that I think is part of the impetus for this book of us just going, why? Who wants to be crowned Mule Queen? Although part of me still wants to be crowned Mule Queen because tiaras are cool.
Yeah, the first thing we were out, when we were touring the museum before we came in, the light board where you can touch stuff, Monica immediately was like, ooh, and touched the tiara. That was like the first thing she was
Because
going
we're
for.
humans, we like shiny things.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's part of the persistence of culture, of pageant culture, right?
Yeah.
Is shiny things are fun.
Yeah.
It's why we like Mardi Gras. It's fun to go to a Mardi Gras parade with a newcomer who at first is like, oh, I am so above all of this, and look at you silly people acting like fools. And then 20 minutes later, they're like right out there going, throw me something, mister. That it is so easy to get, it's, you know, like the person in the Dunbar story, right? Who starts off standing back going, oh no, I am not one of you.
Yeah.
And then immediately it's like, oh,
I
yeah,
am there.
I've been part of it.
Yeah, and I think that's something that, just to kind of like reiterate what you ended on when we were kind of like doing our more formal talk, tackiness is really fun. It's really, sometimes it's just really fun, and is just kind of like a joy in embracing certain things that are fun and not over intellectualizing it all the time. And I think that's something that, to keep citing Michael Bibler's B-52's essay, that he really leans in on, is that like we can kind of like read too much into it, read historical traditions, talk about the OED all we want, but ultimately it's just kind of like, look at Chris, that's awesome. So, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
So.
Just a quick comment that I was reminded of a friend of mine in Columbus years ago who was one of the most Southern people I've ever known. But she said her son, when he was really little, would say his prayers at night out loud when he was going to bed, and that he always ended with, "And please God, don't let me be tacky."
Any other questions? I'm making my way around to the book table. I thought there would be one more question. If there's not, I'll tell an anecdote. A family friend on the coast had a grandmother who sort of had a fall, not a physical fall, but a metaphorical fall. And this fine, upstanding Baptist lady started going to the casinos after they opened. And it wasn't so much that they were horrified that she was going to the casinos, it was that she was doing it while wearing tracksuits. And they just...
Southern women don't wear sweatpants.
Right. Thank you all for being here. We have copies of the Tacky South that our authors and editors will be happy to sign for you. Come back this weekend for the Meriwether Lewis movie at 2 o'clock on Sunday, if you can. Come back next week for Rick Cleveland and Bailey Howell Today. Help me thank these two for this fabulous program today. Thank you, Monica. Thank you, Katie.